Hello and welcome to State Matters. We have two guests today. My first guest is the Social Outreach Director for the Plymouth Council on Aging, and my second guest is the Director of Elder Affairs for the Town of Plymouth. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Young and Conni DiLego. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for inviting us. Glad to be here.
So, we've been talking about, since we started the series back in September, about the opiate crisis. It just seems like it's never ending and it's ongoing. And so what I want to get to is to some comments that you made to me not too long ago about the grandparents raising grandchildren. And what struck me was the amount of grandparents that are there because of their children with that addiction to heroin. And but before we get to that, what I want to do, what we'd like to do is try to get our audience to know who you are. As you know, the audience is more than just Plymouth; it goes beyond Plymouth. And so let's start with you, Jennifer. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I've been one of the social outreach workers for the Council on Aging for the past 5 years. I have worked with some of the grandparents in respect to trying to obtain resources for them. And prior to actually working at the Council on Aging, I worked at a Head Start program for 5 years. So I worked with a lot of children that were actually DCF involved as a result of the opioid addiction.
Wow. Yeah. And what's your degree in?
I'm sorry?
What's your degree in?
It's in psychology.
Psychology, great, that's great. And how long have you been at the Council on Aging now?
For 5 years.
Yeah. Great. I know you have a beautiful daughter.
I do. She's 2 years old.
Yeah,
she's 2 years old. So this discussion is close to me because I do see a lot of kids in her classroom that are also going through this.
Yeah, it's sad. Yeah. Connie.
Yes, sir.
For the few people that don't know who you are, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Name is Conni DiLego. I'm the Director of Elder Affairs at the Plymouth Council on Aging. I'm a longtime resident of Plymouth. Actually, I moved here in 76, and then went away for a few years, got lost on a reservation, and came back and started working at the Council on Aging. I've been here for 10 years now at the Council on Aging.
As director?
Yes. No, I was 4 years as a social worker.
That's right.
And then became the director.
Right. And I know you were one of the ones, a great big push to get the new senior center in place. And how's that going?
It's great. It's absolutely great. I mean, we are at capacity. And we can tell you a little bit about that later if you want to hear more about that.
Tell me now.
Tell you now?
Yeah.
Can I brag a little bit?
Absolutely.
Well, we opened the doors on December 8th in 2012. So let's just go to January of 13. And since we opened our doors, we have increased our participation in it by 84%.
Oh my God.
84%. And that's only with the people that actually do scan. We unfortunately don't get everybody. We rope them whenever we can, but we try to get everybody to scan. But that's only with the scanning machine. We have, our population in Plymouth is growing too.
I heard you say that recently, which was surprising. Tell us about that.
Pretty amazing, isn't it? The numbers, my numbers might not be exact, but what we did is with Jennifer.
We won't hold it to you. Don't worry. Don't worry.
It's close enough, though.
Yeah.
Because Jennifer helped me. If I just did it myself,
we know how you are with numbers.
With numbers, not the best. But we have our population in 2010 from the state was 12,016. For the seniors over 60 in Plymouth.
That was the actual census that was done. That's what it was.
Correct,
okay.
And that's what our formula grant is based on and everything. And so since then, with people that are like 55 and aging up into the over 60s, and all the new people moving in with all these new condominiums and Pine Hills and Makepeace and such, we are at about 20,000, closing 20,000. We thought it would be 2020 when we got there, but we'll be there by the end of this year.
Which is about a third of the population of Plymouth.
It is.
That seems high to me.
It is very high.
For most communities, it probably are not that high, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And we've had the biggest growth. We're second only to Boston in terms of the growth as far as the state is concerned with that age group. And that was from Emmett from Mass Council on Aging who told me that.
Well, it probably says a lot about Plymouth and the community we have. I think we're very fortunate to live in this community with the coastlines and the shopping and restaurants and the culture and the history. And
it is, Matt, but it charges us with a pretty good duty.
Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot of concerns about the people we're not reaching. we have with 20,000 seniors. Of course, not all of them need to come in, and it isn't necessarily a need to come in either. People don't have to come in to get food stamps or to get housing, you know, all of those things that we can help with for resources. But for the activities that we do, we have South Plymouth, Cedarville, down in that area. We don't really reach them a lot, and the elders down there are not going to drive up over the hill. You may as well ask them to go to Kansas. They're not coming in.
It's true.
So we spent a lot of time, the whole staff, just kind of talking about this and how can we do it with who we have and what we have. We've got some ideas that we're going to try to put into effect, and I probably better not talk about them until I speak to the town manager, but we are going to do some outreach.
I think you're absolutely right. You know, I was at a meeting recently where they talked about, the comment was the deep south of Plymouth. But if you think about that, people that are down that far, you're absolutely right. They're not going to come up this far to do that.
They're not.
Matter of fact, most of the stuff they probably do, shopping and things like that, are probably over the bridge in Sandwich or Wareham is where they are probably going, not even to Plymouth.
And there's a lot of the elders down there, because if you've lived here for a long time too, you know that those cottages and those houses that went up there back in the 60s and 70s, and some of those people are still living there.
Yeah.
You know, they've either fixed up the house and made it better or whatever else. So we do have a lot of older people down there that just don't even know what we do. And if they did, they can't get there. And transportation.
Yeah, we're almost big enough, and I think, you know, I've said this publicly before, almost big enough to have, you know, at least a second, if not maybe a third council on aging in this town, because the town is just so big the way it is. Although, but then people say to me, well, but, you know, cities like Brockton only has one, you know, and they manage, they figure out how to do it, so. But yeah, I'd be interested to hear your ideas.
I'd be interested to know how they do it.
Yeah, well, exactly.
You know
maybe
what I mean?
A conversation to have with them to figure out how they do it, but maybe they're not reaching everyone either.
No, and they probably have better transportation.
That's probably it too, yeah.
You know,
and
we
that's
don't
huge
have a
issue.
van or anything, and people don't understand that. In the old days, we did. That was my first job with the Council on Aging in '79.
Right?
I drove one of the vans down Buttermilk Bay and around there.
It's fast becoming one of the #1 issues in this town is transportation. You know, for everyone, but you're right, particularly for the senior population.
Second only
and
to
disabled
housing.
population. Yeah, right. So let's talk about the opiate crisis for a minute. Recently, the House has passed their version of the opiate bill. Of course, the governor filed his, and the Senate has their version. And you know, there's a lot of stool. What am I trying to say? A lot of steps in this whole thing. Before, it used to be 2 or 3 layers you'd have to worry about, but there's so many different layers. From education to how to try and get beds to, you know, treatment.
Prevention.
There's so many. Yeah, there's just so many layers to this. You know, and then recently, after talking to you, I found out, boy, there's a whole nother layer here. It's the grandparents that are raising these, you know, these kids of. Talk about that. Talk about that a little bit. It's heart-wrenching, I think.
It is. It's overwhelming and it's heart-wrenching and it's scary because a lot of the seniors that are assuming this new role of being a parent after they've been removed from it for 20 years aren't really, they aren't skilled in today's society and culture to raise these new children with all this technology and immediate gratification and access to information and social networking and social bullying. I think there's just such a culture shock for the grandparents that are assuming this new responsibility. And there's also, you say the word layers, there's so many layers for just the families alone. You know, the stigma of being a grandparent that says, I now have custody of my grandchildren because my child has an opiate addiction.
Right.
And having to verbalize that to their circle of friends and their support systems.
But why is that such a stigma, though? We
It's
really,
a shame
I think
thing.
we need to get away from that. Recently, we watched that, I don't know if you saw that documentary, Cape Cod, USA, and it sticks in my head, the mother that said, you know, if my son or daughter had cancer, they'd be bringing me a casserole.
Right.
But because he's an addict,
Well,
why?
society
Why
has
is
that image.
Why?
Society has the image of the hope of the drunk. You know, it goes
It's
back
a
to the
disease,
drunk.
though, and we really
Exactly.
It's a
So is
disease.
alcoholism, Matt.
Yeah, it's a disease.
But we still look at it like they're no good. They don't get a life. Take care of yourself. Get up out of there.
do we
You can
change
do
that?
it.
How do
I
we
think
change
human
that
nature is
stigma?
to find blame. It's
Yeah.
to take the responsibility of something off of society as itself and put the blame. And that
Okay,
way
that's a
it
good
can't
point.
touch me.
Well, and you won't remember this, but you will. Even when cancer first became big,
Oh my
people
God.
wouldn't talk about
And
it.
look at AIDS.
Yeah, and in AIDS, they wouldn't talk about it. But then it became, so maybe, like, it's a good point, then maybe over time, then people will get more comfortable with it. You know, say it is a disease and we need to deal with it.
Yeah, but the grandparents, like Jennifer's saying, though, they have this feeling of, I've done something wrong, it's my fault.
Yeah.
It's my fault. So
Yeah.
if I tell you that my son is a drug addict, that makes me look bad. Where did I fail? You know,
Sure.
and so it's guilt, it's shame, it's they're ashamed of. Some of them are ashamed of the child, their child that has this. You know, and they
Sure,
don't want to talk
sure.
about that because they have that feeling that it's their
How do
fault.
you help them with that, Jen? How do you help them to get over that it's not to be ashamed about? I mean, do you say, look at it, it's just like your son or daughter has cancer, it's a disease.
I think the support group is one way to do that. Conni does a great job with that in the support group, finding other people that are going through the same thing, and letting the individuals know that you are not alone. You can share this with other people. I think people are becoming more aware of it through, like the documentary that was just shown. And there's all this momentum built up right now in town. Everybody's talking about it. And I
Yeah.
think it is becoming more of a normalized conversation.
That's good.
As I mentioned to Conni the other day, there's not one person in this town that can say that they have not been affected or know someone that's been affected in some way. I think everybody can relate to it now.
And I can tell you from a state point of view, I think it's the same way at state level as well.
Yeah.
It's the same way. I mean, everyone knows somebody, whether it's their own personal family or
Right.
extended family or friends that have gone through this now. You know, I just recently had a show with both chiefs kind of talking about that, and, you know, what's the difference from 40 years ago when heroin was around when we were kids, but you really didn't want to do it. That was like the last resort,
yeah.
and it was really, you're afraid of that. But nowadays, they're not afraid of that. They're not afraid
That's
of it.
what I don't
They're not,
understand.
you know, and the explanation was, you know, it's cut differently. It's like an 80% pure now, and then they put something like fentanyl in it as well, and it's a bigger high and all that, and then plus the Narcan. So they sell them the heroin, and then they get the Narcan with it as well. So
I think
it's crazy.
as the, you know, being from a younger generation and seeing kids that are growing up now, I spoke to, you know, immediate gratification, you know,
Yeah.
social media. Everything is at everyone's fingertips
Good
now.
point.
And we are, you know, adrenaline seeking. And I think that continues to grow with the younger generation still. You know, dirt biking, mountain biking, snowmobiling. I mean, you can see everything. You have access to all of these different sports now that didn't exist. And I think it's part of how children are growing up with that.
Yeah,
You know,
that's a great point. You know, I did hear recently too that we're probably going to lose a generation because of this. You know, that there's not going to be as many people
Yeah.
turning older because of this.
I can't even
Yeah,
think
yeah.
about
I
that
know.
with a
Yeah.
2-year-old.
I
It's
know.
so
Yeah,
scary
it
to me.
is. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about the actual grandparents raising grandchildren
group?
program, and let's talk about from the beginning how it came about,
Okay.
and, you know, from a state perspective and then from a local perspective.
All right, we do have a long history with that. We've been very proactive.
You've been a leader in this for a while.
The group, yeah, and my co-partner through South Shore Women's Resource Center too. I can't forget her. She has to be nameless, but she's been a huge part of this. When we were still on Court Street with the Council on Aging, and I was beginning there as the social worker, I started to see people coming in saying, you know, I'm taking care of my grandson and I need to get food stamps and I don't know how to go about this. And somebody else would come in and say, I don't know what to do. Somebody just dropped off these kids and I've got them. And this was something really new to me. I hadn't heard anything about this. So I thought, well, why don't we get together and get a group together and talk about the issues that we've got. So we started that, and I worked with the woman at the center too, because we had gotten in contact with each other because I'd called them for some services for these people and decided there were more than we thought. So we began a group there in 2008. No, it was 2005. Anyway, it was way back then. It was 8 when we started the commission. And we started meeting. And getting, we put posters out, we put it on all of the radio stations from here to New Bedford in different languages and everything, just to, you know, beat the bushes and get people in. And they started coming in and we started seeing how serious the issues were. These are people who were ready to retire. You know, a lot of them had their jobs were done, they were finished.
Yeah, what age group are we talking?
Well,
around?
then I was talking more late 50s, 60
Okay.
and into the 70s,
Yep,
right?
okay.
Now it's anywhere, our youngest grandparent was 47, and our oldest one that we had in our group was well into her 80s. There was a woman on the Cape who was definitely in her 80s, and she was raising 3 grandchildren by herself. Amazing. So these people were all set to go, and all of a sudden, now they've got their parents again. And their parents now, they don't have the luxury of being a grandparent, they have to be a parent. And like Jennifer said, they're dealing with new skills and new situations that they never had before. And there isn't a lot of financial assistance for anybody. And so we went to...
From a state level or a federal level?
Correct, either.
Yeah.
We went to the state a bunch of times advocating and speaking to the, to the legislature to try to get them aware of this. And there was a senator at the time, John Lepper, I don't know if you know him or not, and he was also raising grandchildren. So we had an ear, and he knew Representative DiMassino very, very well. So that was kind of an in. So we began pushing it a little bit more. And we were trying to get a bill passed that would help the grandparents get the same kind of funding that foster parents get, because they're doing essentially the same thing. And could we just get a little bit of help for them? And that didn't happen, but what we were able to get is a commission. So the state organized a commission on the status of grandparents raising
And
grandchildren.
The former Senate President was very instrumental in this.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah, I heard that, yeah.
Yep, Senator Murray,
Murray,
State
yeah.
Senator Murray.
Yeah.
And she was behind it a lot,
yeah.
moving that.
So what is that? What does that?
Well,
what does that do?
what that did to start with is they did this statewide listening tour, going from Pittsfield up and down and all across the whole state, and holding listening series to see what the situations were in the communities. And we really found out it was the same thing. Finances is number one. We need help. And housing, because we had some people living in retirement communities. Well, you can't live in a retirement community or a mobile home park with a young child. So all of a sudden they have to find another place to live. Where are we going to do that? They're dealing with children who are traumatized, very much. Some of them horribly traumatized, I mean, through sexual, physical abuse or whatever, and others just because dad is gone or mom is gone, and
now I'm living with grandma. Yeah,
and she used to be
that's-
grandma. I could sit on her lap and she'd sing to me, and
Yeah.
now she has to discipline me
Yeah.
And you
and
want
take
to
me
add
to
to that,
school.
conduct disorders and oppositional
Oh my God,
defiance
yeah.
disorders, because they were raised in an environment where structure was not
Right.
something that they were exposed to
Yeah.
every day.
And not everybody was, and not all the kids were raised in that, but most of them were raised in very, very dysfunctional families, horrific situations. And so all of a sudden, now they're dropped on grandma and grandpa's door, and what are we going to do? We've had grandmothers, couples that have divorced. We've had one that had died, just stress. We've had, I can't even think all of the situations. At the time when we started back in 2005, 6, most of the cases that the grandparents that came in had to do with alcohol and drug addiction, but not like today.
I like that.
And we had some in there. We have grandparents in there whose children were murdered. Their daughter murdered by the husband and that kind of stuff, or someone whose son is in jail, or they're both addicts or whatever. But back there it was more alcohol. Now, 98% of it, Matt, is all the heroin, all of it. And within the Christmas of December 14 and this year, they've lost 5 children.
And how many are in the group? 20 or something?
I'd say 20. We have 20 steady. We have a list of maybe 35. Some who come, and some who, when they can. And we have day meetings and night meetings. But 98% of them are there because their child is either overdosed or died or is in jail because of it. But 5 deaths this past year.
And what's the age group of these grandparents now?
Again, we have another young one in there in her 40s. I'd say
Yeah.
44, 45.
Yeah.
And Noreen, I think, is the oldest. No, Anne. I'm not sure. 70.
Yeah.
In the 70s.
So what does the group do for these folks?
Just them being able to sit and talk with each other.
Okay.
They come up with a lot of solutions. They help each other. They go to each other's houses. They help, if something's going on, they'll help
So it's
them out.
supporting each other. as
Very
well
much
as,
supporting each
yeah,
other. And the fact that you can talk to somebody else who's going through this, because they don't talk with their friends about it, you have nothing to share. you know, and they go to the schools with the kids, or they go to functions and everything, and they're older. You know, and everybody's in couples and everybody's in pairs, and they're all young, 30s and 40s, and you know, young kids. And there they are.
Why'd you look at her when you said 40s?
She's young.
Yeah, but she said 40s, though. I think she looked at you.
30s and going, you know what I mean. But
I think if I can for a second,
Sure.
one of the things that I noticed when I first came to the Council on Aging, I've had a lot of experience working with support groups in the mental health field. What I noticed about this support group in particular is that when a new member would come in, it was usually around information seeking. It's because you're working with various systems, it's very sort of disintegrated. When you're trying to find out, you know, how do I obtain custody? How do I get mass health? What's the appropriate steps? What do I need? Who do I call? How do I get there? These grandparents that have been through it and experienced the same situations are the best resources.
They are.
Because it is really hard to find information from various different resources like that. And for me, that was just something that set it apart.
But it is difficult to get the resource. I know
there isn't any.
I was just going to say, we had a gentleman that came to us, 3 grandchildren dropped on his step. And he was told by, I forget what state agency, that you would have been better off letting the state take him into custody and then take him from the state, and you were able to get resources rather than what he did was he just took him right away from the home.
But that's iffy, though. I mean, that particular agency, and I know who you're talking about, they're not all well informed with this.
That's what we're seeing
as
from a state legislative perspective. That's what we're seeing too. Yeah.
And your hospitals aren't informed. Your legal situation is very, very few lawyers that understand this situation, or judges that understand this situation. You know, and the process has always been trying to get unification, reunification, get the kids back with the family. This is going to be temporary, and then we'll fix it so they can go back. So if mom or dad come back in and I've been sober for 3 months and I'm ready to go, take the kids back and everything, and it just doesn't happen. They go back with the parents, and then the parents fail. Last year we had one of our grandparents had been raising her granddaughter for a year, almost 2 years. And her son and daughter-in-law were both addicted. They got straight. They were into therapy, and they got straight for a while, for a year. And so she had made a list of things that they had to adhere to, not just what DCF was telling them to do, what she wanted them to do to prove that they were okay. Met it. They did it. The young girl got pregnant again. They got back together. And so my grandparent relinquished the child, gave her back to her mom and dad with the new one, and they moved up to Maine. Within 2 months, they were both addicted again. Now she's got 2 kids. They had to redo the house in Maine so that they could now have 2, bedrooms for the kids. It's but the informational piece is vital.
So who do they contact when they when they get into the situation?
Well, they'll go to the court, or they'll call different offices. They'll make a trail of calls, Matt, until...
So there's not one place that they can go to say, this is what you need to do.
We tried to get that.
Do you think that's what the state needs to kind of do?
We wanted like an 800 number or something for grandparents raising grandchildren. They have a website. They have a good website, and they have some...
Who has the website? Is it
the grandparents.
The commission?
The commission, sorry.
Okay, yeah, okay.
The commission on grandparents raising... If they go to mass.gov and then put in grandparents raising grandchildren, it'll come up.
Okay, so that could be a resource for
It is a starting resource, right.
I do want to get back to what you said about this gentleman came to you and he had 3 grandchildren dropped on his doorstep. A lot of stories have come up recently, over the past year about, families in light of DCF. Being a parent, and I'm sure my mom feels the same way. If something was to happen to me, you would want to go and take your child.
Sure.
So your child does not with social services on the day of something that was so traumatic that happened to them, that caused them to be removed from the home.
Right.
And when you look at it from a systematic standpoint, that really is one of the biggest mistakes that's made, is because, like you said, you need to give up the kids and let them go to be with the state, so now you can get the services that you need.
We should be
it goes
rewarding
against
them
everything.
and helping them.
Absolutely.
Because
Thank
then
you.
it would save us. By
When
not
it-
having in state custody, it saves us as a state
Can I
money.
tell you how many millions and billions of
Oh,
dollars
sure.
the grandparents have saved? The state
Absolutely,
over
yeah.
these, especially the ones that don't get any assistance.
And then try to pay for daycare for them. I mean, that's the other part that this gentleman had is, how do I get vouchers?
Absolutely.
This
And you can't.
You
yeah.
can't.
Yep. And
Very
then
hard.
if they do sign up, the messages are very mixed. And if they
Yeah.
do go into DCF to get assistance, your life is kind of taken over. They're just on you, they're with you all the time, you know, and it's like, you don't always get the child back. This whole thing about having DCF taking the kid that day, which is in the most traumatic, horrible
It goes
point of
against
time,
everything in human nature.
you know, and putting him in the foster home until we can clear grandpa and grandma.
Is that what happens in some
Sometimes.
cases?
Oh, yes.
Sometimes,
I didn't know that.
Oh,
Unless,
yeah.
if you have a family that does not have everything set up, you don't have your
the right two bedrooms.
well,
or-
your will and you know, estate planning done. There is no documentation to say I do want my kid to go here. So they do have to go
I
through
see.
the appropriate channels. But if there is a traumatic incident, domestic violence, the child should be with somebody that can comfort them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it doesn't really work that way.
No, and I hear the state, you know, well, we have to be sure, yeah, but think of the child first.
Right.
And it should be the child first. And that's
Right.
what Senator Lepper used to always say to it, the child first.
Right.
What is the best interest of the
That
child?
yeah,
You know?
Yeah.
But,
What is, do the folks that are in your support groups, what suggestions, if they had one or two suggestions, changes to make at a state level, what would they be, do you think?
to lessen the regulations a little bit, like we're talking about right now in terms of the immediacy of things. But also, the HIPAA laws are kind of crazy. They kind of mess things up sometimes. We had another situation with a young mother, I think under 50 or just about 50, whose daughter-in-law, they were both veterans. The daughter-in-law was killed in Afghanistan, and the son was over there too. And she was watching the kids while they were gone. The son comes home and he's addicted. And she works with him to try to get it. He goes into recovery many, many times and just isn't quite doing it right. And then at one point he overdoses and he's gone too. Well, she knew he was sick. She knew he was out. At one point before he died, he was in the hospital, and she tried to get information because she didn't know am I supposed to bring the child over there tonight? Who's going on? Where's the other grandmother? What's happening? I just need to know what's his condition right now. Nothing. You can get nothing. You can't get any information.
Even though she was the mother because he was an adult?
Correct. She could not get any information, and ultimately wasn't able to get to him. I mean, wasn't able to, and he
wow.
left the hospital, went behind the car.
Yeah. So we're running out of time, but real quick, is there a certain day of the week that these grandparents meet?
They meet every Thursday from 10 until 11:30, every Thursday.
At the Council on
At the
Aging.
Council on Aging, and then we meet the first Tuesday of the month at 5:30, and that's a meal. We have supper and we have a
where's that
sitter at the Council on Aging.
At the Council on Aging too?
Yep,
Great,
and
great.
we have supper and babysitter, and the
Yeah.
kids come in with them, and that's
That's once a
important.
month?
Yeah,
That's once,
And
the other
that's-
one's once a week?
correct.
Yeah, okay, good.
And we think it's
good.
important to bring the kids in too,
Yeah.
because it's the same thing. They get
Yeah.
to talk with them. They've become friends. Some of them
Yeah.
we've had since they were
Yeah,
year-old.
well, continue the great work,
Thanks.
and we'll talk more offline on this and whatever I can do to maybe help with this a little bit, move it along, but it's very eye-opening what you both brought today, so we need to continue with that discussion, so thank you so much for joining me today. So thank you so much at home for watching us today. Thank you to the staff and the volunteers at PAC TV for all you do, and we'll see you next time on State Matters. Thanks for watching.